The empty chair across the table slowly became impossible to ignore. Every passing minute felt heavier than the last as people around the restaurant laughed, celebrated birthdays, shared stories, and created memories while one untouched glass of water sat waiting for someone who would never arrive. I kept checking the entrance even after my coffee had gone cold, convincing myself there had to be an explanation. But deep inside, I already knew the truth. I had been stood up. What I didn't know was that before I walked out of that restaurant, one unexpected conversation with a waitress would completely change the direction of my life. If you believe kindness and second chances can completely transform someone's life, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from, share this story with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to Ripple of Kindness 2 for more emotional stories that remind us humanity still exists. Owen Mercer had almost cancelled the date 3 different times before finally gathering enough courage to leave his apartment that Saturday afternoon. At 38 years old, he had spent years convincing himself that loneliness was easier than disappointment. His work as a furniture craftsman kept his hands busy but his heart empty. Every chair, table, and cabinet he built eventually found a family, while he returned every evening to a silent apartment where the only sound came from an old clock inherited from his grandfather. Friends had encouraged him to try online dating for years. After months of hesitation, he finally agreed to meet someone named Marissa, whose messages had been thoughtful and kind. She seemed interested in the same simple things that mattered to him: morning walks, books, volunteering, and quiet conversations over coffee. They chose a family restaurant filled with sunlight pouring through large windows overlooking a small city park. It seemed like the perfect place to begin something new. Owen arrived 20 minutes early because he believed punctuality showed respect. He straightened his blue button-up shirt several times, nervously adjusted the sleeves, and smiled politely every time the front door opened. He imagined how awkward the first few minutes might be before laughter eventually replaced nervousness. 20 minutes passed. Then 40. An hour. The hopeful smile slowly disappeared. The waitress assigned to his table noticed everything without saying much. Her name tag read Nora Ellison. She looked to be around 32, wore her brown hair neatly tied back, and carried herself with the calm confidence of someone who had learned to stay gentle despite life's disappointments. She kept refilling Owen's coffee without charging him for another cup. She never made him feel embarrassed. Instead, she quietly offered kindness through small actions. When the restaurant became less crowded, Nora finally asked whether he wanted the check. Owen forced a smile and nodded. He admitted that his date probably wasn't coming after all. Saying those words aloud hurt more than he expected. It wasn't only about being rejected. It reminded him of every other time life had quietly whispered that he simply wasn't enough. Nora looked toward the empty chair for several seconds before asking if she could sit down for just a moment because she wanted to tell him something. She wasn't smiling anymore. She seemed almost nervous. She explained that earlier that afternoon, before Owen had arrived, a woman matching Marissa's description had entered the restaurant. She had looked around, spotted Owen's reservation card on the table, and immediately asked to speak privately with the manager. Nora happened to overhear part of the conversation while delivering meals nearby. The woman admitted she had recognized Owen from his profile picture but had decided she couldn't go through with the date because she believed he looked older than she expected. She left before Owen ever walked through the front door. Nora had debated for nearly an hour whether she should tell him the truth. She worried it might make the situation even more painful. But she believed lies often leave people blaming themselves, while the truth, though painful, allows healing to begin. For several moments Owen couldn't say anything. Oddly enough, hearing the truth hurt less than endless uncertainty. He wasn't wondering anymore whether something terrible had happened or whether she was simply running late. The answer was painfully simple. Someone had judged him within seconds. Instead of anger, Owen felt strangely calm. He thanked Nora for being honest. She apologized on behalf of someone she had never even met properly, saying no one deserved to sit alone wondering what they had done wrong. Those simple words reached a part of Owen's heart that had been quietly carrying years of invisible scars. Before leaving, he paid his bill, thanked every employee who had served him, and quietly walked toward the exit. As he reached the door, an elderly man standing outside suddenly collapsed onto the sidewalk. Without hesitation, Owen rushed forward. Several pedestrians froze in shock, but Owen immediately knelt beside the man, checking whether he was breathing while asking someone nearby to call emergency services. Nora saw everything through the restaurant window. She ran outside carrying bottled water and a folded jacket to place beneath the man's head until paramedics arrived. The elderly gentleman, whose name was Franklin Hayes, regained consciousness before the ambulance reached the restaurant. He squeezed Owen's hand with surprising strength and whispered his gratitude. It turned out Franklin lived alone only a few streets away. His blood sugar had dropped after forgetting to eat while spending the morning at the local community garden. After doctors confirmed he was stable, Owen insisted on driving him home. Nora unexpectedly offered to come along because she wanted to make sure Franklin had groceries. Together they discovered a modest little house surrounded by flowers that desperately needed watering. Inside were hundreds of framed photographs documenting decades of volunteer work, charity projects, and neighborhood celebrations. Franklin had quietly spent most of his retirement helping strangers. His late wife had shared the same passion. Now, living alone had made simple daily routines increasingly difficult. Instead of leaving after a few minutes, Owen repaired Franklin's broken front gate while Nora organized his kitchen and prepared enough meals for several days. Neither of them noticed how naturally they worked together. There was no awkwardness. No pressure. Just two strangers choosing kindness because someone needed help. Over the following weeks, Owen continued visiting Franklin every Saturday morning. Sometimes Nora joined them after finishing her breakfast shift. Together they cleaned flower beds, repaired loose shelves, painted fences, and listened to Franklin's endless collection of life stories. The old man often laughed that fate had strange ways of introducing people. He joked that perhaps the best relationships never begin with perfect plans. Instead, they begin with imperfect moments that reveal a person's true character. Owen gradually found himself looking forward to Saturdays more than any other day of the week. Not because he expected romance. Simply because spending time with Nora made ordinary moments feel meaningful. She asked thoughtful questions. She listened more than she spoke. She celebrated small victories. She remembered details most people forgot. For the first time in years, Owen felt truly seen. One afternoon Franklin surprised them with a dusty wooden box discovered in his attic. Inside were handwritten letters exchanged between him and his wife during their early years together. Each letter spoke less about grand romantic gestures and more about ordinary acts of kindness. Making soup when someone was sick. Repairing a neighbor's porch. Holding a frightened child's hand during a storm. Franklin smiled through watery eyes as he explained that lasting love wasn't built through dramatic promises. It was built through thousands of quiet decisions to choose compassion every single day. Those words stayed with Owen long after he returned home. He realized he had spent years searching for someone who would immediately recognize his worth. Perhaps real connection wasn't about instant attraction at all. Perhaps it grew slowly through shared values. As autumn approached, Franklin suggested organizing a neighborhood festival to raise money for struggling families before winter arrived. Despite his age, he insisted the community still needed reasons to come together. Owen volunteered to build wooden benches, handmade toy boxes, and picnic tables for auction. Nora coordinated local restaurants willing to donate food. Children painted colorful signs while retirees baked homemade pies. The entire neighborhood slowly transformed into something beautiful. The festival exceeded everyone's expectations. Families laughed together beneath bright blue skies. Musicians filled the park with cheerful melodies. Children raced between games while volunteers distributed warm meals to anyone who needed them. By sunset they had raised enough money to repair several elderly neighbors' homes and provide winter supplies for dozens of families. Watching everyone celebrate, Owen realized he hadn't thought once about the blind date that never happened. That painful afternoon had quietly become one of the greatest turning points of his life. Later that evening, Franklin gently placed an old photograph into Owen's hands. It showed Franklin and his wife standing beside the very community garden where they had first met decades earlier. On the back she had written a single sentence. "The right people never arrive too late. They arrive exactly when your heart is finally ready to recognize them." Owen folded the photograph carefully. He looked toward Nora, who was helping children pack leftover food for local shelters. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She simply cared. That quiet kindness had been there from the very beginning. Months later, on another bright afternoon, Owen returned to the same restaurant where everything had started. This time he reserved the very same table with the same 2 chairs. When Nora finished her shift, she walked over smiling, curious why he had requested that particular table. Instead of speaking immediately, Owen placed 2 fresh coffees on the table. One chair was no longer empty. There were no grand speeches. No dramatic performances. Only gratitude. He thanked her for choosing honesty instead of silence on the hardest afternoon of his life. He admitted that her courage had restored something he thought he had permanently lost, his belief that genuine people still existed. Nora quietly confessed something of her own. The reason she had struggled so much about telling him the truth was because watching him wait patiently for someone who never came reminded her of her own father, who had always treated everyone with respect even when life treated him unfairly. She said kindness should never go unnoticed. Neither realized how long they had been talking until the afternoon sunlight began stretching across the floor. Outside the windows, people hurried through another ordinary day. Inside, 2 lives had found an extraordinary beginning born entirely from compassion. Franklin watched through the restaurant window for a brief moment before continuing his evening walk, smiling to himself without interrupting them. Sometimes happiness doesn't arrive wearing the clothes we expect. Sometimes it quietly serves coffee, offers honesty instead of comfortable lies, and reminds a lonely stranger that rejection from the wrong person can become the first step toward